Today is Wednesday, June 11th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Great Britain, are they heading towards civil war? We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating if you haven't done it. That's your homework assignment if you have not done that yet on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Just click the little rating button or write a comment. Do something like that. That's your homework. We'd appreciate it. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We're getting through the news of the cray here each and every weekday, bright and early. Joining me today, CBN's Trey Gons-Phillips and Billy Hallowell. On the focus story, Bill, you are looking into an interesting trend.
Yes, really interesting information. A new survey that came out from Barna and NRB regarding Christian media and a shocking percentage of Americans who actually use Christian media. We'll get into that today.
All right, looking forward to the details there. And on the main thing, as I mentioned, CBN's Dale Hurd is looking into what's going on in Great Britain. There are some experts warning about it's just a powder keg over there and it could get really, really bad. So CBN's Dale Hurd has more on the main thing. Make sure you're subscribed to all of our CBN News podcasts, Billy's Newsmakers, Trey, Faith and Culture, Navigating Trump 2.0 with John Stolness. I make frequent appearances on that one as well. Heaven Meets Earth, CBN's Abigail Robertson. Great podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed to all of them. The links are right there in the description of this podcast episode. And with that, we are going to head to the news in 90 seconds. In a long suppressed study on puberty blockers, led by a top advocate of so-called gender-affirming care, shows no statistically significant improvement in depression among trans-identified youth after 2 years of quote-unquote treatment. While suicide ideation appeared to decline slightly, the overall mental health outcomes did not improve. And the researchers admitted they delayed publishing the findings out of fear they'd be used to challenge puberty blocker use in court. The release comes as critics, including President Trump, are pushing back on gender procedures for minors, calling them dangerous and unethical. Over 20 U.S. states have banned puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for minors. And President Trump says the National Guard will remain in Los Angeles until there's no danger, the president said, following a fourth straight day of tense standoffs between protesters and police downtown. While most of the city remains unaffected, parts of the downtown area have seen damage, graffiti, and there was reports of one casualty this week as well. About 700 Marines are now on the ground with another 2,000 National Guard troops mobilized. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more over at cbnnews.com. Obviously, continue praying for the ridiculous situation that's going on in California right now. It's out of control and remaining largely out of control in certain areas. So prayers there. Looking at this study, guys, on the puberty blockers, and it's very interesting because these activists have very much pushed that this is absolutely necessary, that people who identify as trans absolutely need this quote unquote care, or else it's just going to be terrible for them. And then here comes this study, and the person doing it clearly has a bias because they're like, oh, we don't want to, they had a hopeful outcome in mind of this. So clearly you have to question just the whole results of the thing anyway. And how bad must it have actually been that even the results after this show that there's really no improvement there whatsoever? And I think as Christians, guys, we can know why there's no improvement, because you're not addressing the actual issue, which is a misplaced identity. You're putting your identity and your gender and what sex you are instead of as a child of God and as a created being made in the image of God. Instead of those things, you're putting it in this other identity, and that's going to fall short every single time. And so it's no surprise to me that this study is showing what it shows.
Well, you know, follow the science until the science says something you don't like. That's apparently what we're supposed to be doing. I think that what's so sad about this is that when this is the thing that is used as a bludgeon to parents whose children are struggling with gender identity issues, telling them that they're going to die from suicide, they're going to kill themselves if you don't put them through these hormones, if you don't do this, telling people that if they transition, they're going to find happiness, selling this false promise, and then having data that purportedly proves that it is not true is one of the most evil things imaginable. I'll just say that. I think it's actually very scary that data would be withheld, or that data would be held back in any way, and that lie would continue to be perpetuated.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I also think that this issue to me is similar to an addiction of some kind, right? I mean, time and again, if you have followed somebody's story of somebody who went through these kinds of procedures, it's never enough, right? You need another thing to get that next high, all right? It's not actually solving an issue. It's just kicking the issue down the road, right? You're looking for a false solution to a heart problem. As cliche as that sounds, that's true, right? You have a God-shaped hole in your heart. That is the thing that's missing. And that is the thing that you're not understanding about your identity. And I've seen so many stories of these people who go in like, well, once I have the hormone replacement therapy, then I'll feel good. And that's like, well, once I have this surgery that alters my body, then I'll feel good. And it just keeps evolving and evolving and evolving. And when I see it with kids in particular, it's like, this is just nothing short of just demonic child abuse, that you are allowing your kid to go down this road that is, like I said, nothing short of an addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. And agree with you that it's essentially child abuse. And it's all based on a lie. And it's incredible that it's been allowed to be perpetuated for this long. But when you deny the way God made you, and again, it's not to dismiss that people struggle with these thoughts, but that's exactly what it is. It's thoughts that don't comport with the reality of who you are and what you are. And so to just try to say that the right answer is to play along with this misconception, with this false idea that people have in their minds is so wrong and unhelpful. It's naturally not going to work, but they have convinced themselves that it will. So it's just a very damaging thing. And we need to be praying for people caught up in this, because now it's become trendy and people have in the last few years made it the cool thing to do. You're edgy and I don't know. It's just the in thing to do, to be trying to go along as one of these identities. And it's not surprising to me at all that it's not working, and it's having, I think, a negative effect overall. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. So we need to be praying for that issue as well. All right, we are going to head over to the focus story now. And another new study is providing some interesting insights about Christian media. So what's the story here?
Yeah, this is fascinating. The Barna Group and NRB, National Religious Broadcasters, they came together to work on this survey and this study of Christian media, and essentially went to Americans and asked them if they're engaging in Christian media. And that could mean a lot of different things. It can mean everything from YouTube, Christian YouTube. It could be, regular media outlets like CBN or whatnot. But it's sort of a wide array of media. They were asked if they engage, and the results were pretty shocking. I think they even shocked Troy Miller, who's the CEO and president of National Religious Broadcasters. We had him on to talk about some of this data, and even Barna Group was surprised. What Troy told us is that when they asked in the survey, they asked people to answer how they use Christian media outside of their church. It was important to make sure that church media wasn't getting mixed in, so they can get a real sense of just how pervasive and how used is Christian media. And what they found was that 60% of Americans, not Christians, 60% of Americans use Christian media in some form, which is a pretty big number. Troy said, I expected it to have a big number, but 60%, that was great. And it's really exciting.
So what's the lesson here? What should Christian outlets and other Christians making that are content creators, what's the lesson here?
Well, I mean, the lesson, here's the deal. The lesson for Bible-based press and outlets, and remember, this is television, radio, podcast, news, websites, social media, or YouTube. That's what they were looking at here. And Troy said the big lesson for Christian outlets and Christian media is that people are paying attention. They're really paying attention to what's going on, and they're looking for something. He said, when you look at people and you ask them, why are you looking at Christian media? People were telling them in the survey, they were looking for encouragement and for hope. And he said he believes some of this is a rejection of the mainstream culture's message, that's why so many people are actually turning and going to Christian media. The other thing is that people are widely seen as trusting Christian media, which I think is really interesting. 66% of Americans said that Christian media is both valuable and trustworthy. So, they're looking for answers. They're looking for encouragement and hope. And that's a real gospel opportunity, right, for people. If you're a Christian media outlet, the two biggest areas where people are gathering is YouTube and social media. So that's where they're consuming Christian media the most. So that sort of opens up the question of, are we doing enough in those spaces, right? So that was one of the lessons he wanted media outlets to take away from that.
That's really interesting that people are looking at Christian media as potentially a lot of it because of a trust issue. And I wonder if people seeing over time that one side, the secular media, anyone who's secular, they don't really have an ultimate source to answer to. They don't have an ultimate authority to answer to. So that can lead you to justify, as we've seen, the quote unquote good lie, right? So if you think, oh, well, if we lie about this and it helps the greater good, we can do it. Whereas Christians, we have to answer to God for the things we do. And that doesn't mean we're going to be perfect. We're not going to be nailing every single thing, every report as Christian journalists and reporters and commentators. But you at least know that we're trying to do that to the best of our ability, whereas you can't know that for sure with so many other places. But what's the most surprising thing that you saw in this study?
Yeah, the biggest surprise is that you would assume, when you think Christian media, you sometimes think older demographic. That is not what's happening. It's young people who are driving Christian media consumption. I'm going to read you part of the press release on this report. Compared to non-users, Christian media users tend to be younger. Social media is a dominant force in this landscape, commanding the broadest reach among Christian media platforms. Gen Z leads the way with 64% engaging with Christian social media accounts, followed by millennials at 58%. It is the young people using social media, which that part does make sense. But the fact that they're using Christian media the most is pretty surprising and pretty interesting. And so, Troy said this sort of bucks the narrative that Christian media, again, is for the older generation. We're seeing young people be the ones to drive it.
Yeah. I mean, I think people, like we've talked about on this podcast, guys, that people are yearning for truth in an age when truth is in short supply, and they're being made aware of that because they're being told things that are blatantly untrue. And they're trying to say, well, this is actually true. Men can get pregnant. And then everyone's like, wait a minute. I'm not I'm not a scientist, but I think I know that that's not true. But they're being told that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that, Dan. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what people believe these days, or they want you to believe, and they say that. And of course, they're referring to gender dysphoria. If you say you're a woman, even though you're a dude, they'll say that you can get pregnant. It's just kind of crazy. But it's I think it's a sign of the times that people now are looking for truth, and they're gonna naturally end up gravitating and saying, well, let me try this Christian outlet.
Did Billy, did the data show anywhere what the majority of younger, where they're going, where the majority of younger people are going for their Christian content?
Yeah, the majority, I mean, broadly going to social media and YouTube.
Okay, like is it like
specific
TikTok,
accounts?
Instagram?
Yeah, I don't know, actually. It's a good question. I did not see specifics on that, but were at least published, but it would be interesting to know.
The only reason I mention it is because I think you're 100% right, Dan. I think people are fed up with secular media. They don't, it's completely unmoored. There's no like moral compass there with so much of secular media. And there's been such a balloon of social media influencers, Christian influencers who are specifically on TikTok. And there have been so many criticisms of TikTok for good reason. But there's also been a lot of great Christian content that's come out of TikTok. And I just wonder if that's where a lot of people are going. Because I know so many of my, I'm 33, but so many of the people that I'm friends with in their early to mid 20s, they're all going to TikTok for their news content, which is a little bit concerning, but also encouraging if they're going to Christian content creators, because I think there is value there. People are searching for hope, and the media writ large is not giving it to us. But there are a lot of Christians who are utilizing media to give us that hope that we need.
Yeah. All right, Billy, final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, look, the big lesson, and this is why this data is so important, it helps people figure out how do we reach, if you're working in Christian media, how do we reach people more? Where are they gathering, right? You can spend all your time spinning wheels and being in the wrong places. And so I think this is actually very helpful, and we're going to need more of this data as time goes on because things change and they ebb and they flow.
All right. Well, appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today. Certainly good food for thought there, and something that outlets like us need to consider, and also anybody posting things. If you're going to be on social media, think about where you're going to be and what kind of content you want to put out there. All right, we're going to go to the main thing now. And as I mentioned at the top there, Great Britain is a powder keg, just really simmering beneath the surface here. And King's College London professor of war studies, Dr. David Betts, had set off alarm bells this year when he warned that Britain's headed really towards a civil war. He actually advised people to get out of there, pack up and move before things got really bad. So how real of a threat is this? CBN's Dale Hurd has the story.
Great Britain looks like a nation where life is functioning normally. Below the surface, however, lies a growing sense that the United Kingdom is coming apart at the seams. King's College London professor of war studies David Betts set off alarm bells this year by saying Britain is headed towards civil war, and he advised people living in its large cities to move before the violence starts.
Imagine Northern Ireland scale, or Northern Ireland in intensity, but on a completely national scale. Attacks on public figures, judges, potentially politicians.
London Daily Telegraph columnist Tim Stanley told us he agrees with Betts that Britain is heading for open sectarian conflict, possibly war, and there's nothing we can do to stop it.
And his argument is this, that first of all, Britain displays many of the signs of being a failed state, such as economic decline, total loss of trust in the police, and a fractious and increasingly extreme politics.
At the center of this unrest is a government multicultural experiment that has brought in large numbers of Muslims without requiring them to integrate. More continue to arrive daily. This is Britain's southern border, the English Channel, across from the coast of France. And it's as porous as the Rio Grande River. 2 weeks ago, 1,200 illegal migrants arrived in a single day.
When you have a country in decline, and you add large numbers of new people into the mix, what you end up with is ethnic conflict over resources.
Experts fear all that might be needed to trigger a civil war is another terror attack. White working-class anger exploded last summer when the son of a Rwandan immigrant stabbed 11 children and 2 adults at a dance studio. 3 girls died. Social media posts initially misidentified the killer as an illegal migrant, sparking the worst riots in 10 years. Only much later did police reveal the killer possessed an Al-Qaeda training manual. Right-wing and working-class British are also angry over what they claim is a 2-tier justice system that favors Muslims. Last week, this man was convicted of a crime for publicly burning a Quran in a political protest. A Muslim man with a knife who threatened to kill him faced no charges. Lucy Connolly, a 41-year-old mother, is serving 31 months in prison for a tweet appearing to encourage violence against illegal migrants after the murders of those 3 girls in Southport. She got more jail time than some of the members of this Pakistani sex grooming gang, convicted for child prostitution and having sex with a minor. Add to this rising crime, Orwellian state censorship, and economic decline in many areas. Academic and news commentator Matt Goodwin.
I think there is a widespread consensus in the country that Britain is a nation in decline, economically, demographically, and culturally, there are areas that are just as poor as Eastern Europe, as parts of the developing world, in Northern England, in some of our coastal towns.
The perception is, among the white working class, that the state actively prefers ethnic minorities and is funneling resources their way. Some white working class people, they're saying, why is it they get hotel rooms? Why is it they get welfare when we are struggling?
The riots and the disturbances were symptomatic of a much deeper disillusionment in this country with the way in which British people just no longer feel safe in their own communities. They no longer feel safe in their country where lawlessness is essentially being sanctioned by the state.
Political strategist Dominic Cummings says elements within the British government are finally beginning to discuss Britain's slide into chaos and the potential for serious violence. Oliver J.J. Lane is the bureau chief of Breitbart London.
There are two sort of issues feeding into this, first of which is essentially civilizational collapse, which is causing a rise in crime and potentially civil unrest between ethnic groups. And then on the other hand, you have government incompetence and policing incompetence, and that creates that downward spiral.
One pollster conducting focus groups in small English towns this year said the disillusionment was the worst I've heard. In every group, it was anger, despondency, or misery about the state of Britain that doesn't feel sustainable. One focus group member suggested Britain might need a coup. Professor Betts says civil war could also break out in France, as well as the United States. Stanley believes civil war in the UK could be avoided through the spiritual awakening already underway.
There is something going on here. Church attendance is up. Young people are becoming more religious than ever. If there is a potential for change, it's going to come from society and the grassroots and ordinary people. It's not going to come from politicians.
The famous British economist Adam Smith cautioned the prophets of doom when he said there is a great deal of ruin in a nation. In other words, it takes a lot to bring a country down. But Britain now has so many problems, it just might test that theory. Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
All right. Appreciate that. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
We've got Matthew 6:22. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. We've shared that one before, but it's an important one when we're talking about media and its influence.
Yeah. There's no way that what we're taking in, whether music, shows, TV, movies, anything, music we listen to, all of it is impacting us. So we need to be wise about what we're taking in.
Amen. Good spot to leave it here on the Quick Start podcast. As always, make sure you're getting on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise up on us. We'll be back here tomorrow with more. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. God bless. See you tomorrow.